Welcome to the Breakfast Leadership Show, where we interview global thought leaders on business, leadership, and life. Here's your host, keynote speaker, best-selling author, and chief burnout officer of the Breakfast Leadership Network, Michael Levitt.
Welcome back. I've got Mike Merrill and Joe Judge on the line. How are you, gentlemen?
Fantastic.
Good to be with you.
Great to be with both of you. Really looking forward to this conversation. So we'll start off with you, Mike. I want to share a little bit about you, and then we'll hand it over to Joe to share, and then we'll dive into this conversation about leadership and how people perceive it differently than what it actually is.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a physician. I worked as a chief medical officer of a hospital. Right now, I work for the chief medical officer of Brook Health, which is a remote care company. And Joe and I wrote a book together. So.
And Joe, we'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so I grew up a blue-collar kid, and as life started to evolve, I became more and more associated with people who knew something that I didn't. And I developed a passion for leadership because I knew I had to learn. And so that's kind of been my life journey, is how do you get a little bit better? And as you get better, how do you share it with other people? And Mike and I happened to collide in San Diego. And it was a life-changing breakfast as we met. And it was true. We wound up writing a book together.
Yeah, it's awesome. I've had many a great breakfast in San Diego. So it's a wonderful, wonderful place for a lot of things. You know, the real vitamin D, the ocean, but also it's an incubator for ideas and concepts and new businesses. So we talked a little bit in the pre-show about leadership and how people look at it and how it might be a little bit different than how people traditionally define what leadership is. So you want to open up the floor to both of you on your thoughts on that and, you know, what we're getting, I don't want to say wrong, but maybe how we could look at it a little bit differently, which could actually improve, you know, the outcomes of what leaders are supposed to do and organizations are attempting to do. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. And I think for me, it all starts with the age-old conversation, you know, about natural-born leaders. And I think there's a misnomer in that. And I think what has happened over the years is it's evolved into certain personality traits. And then we have gotten lost in the reality that leaders are required to stop and to pause and to think and realize that their natural instincts might be their natural instincts, and it might be effective in some circumstances. But natural instincts are not typically leadership instincts. And a for instance would be somebody comes into your office and they're all worked up and they're emotional. And we can either allow our emotions to rise as well, or we can withdraw. But a leader hits the pause button, looks at the situation and goes very calmly, hey, something's really bothering you. What is it? Let's talk, right? And what we're seeing so much today is somebody calling somebody out, somebody, you know, just with a mean word towards somebody else. And we don't realize how ugly the natural can be at times. And yet what we see is that leadership by a base definition has to bring people together and move them forward. And we live in a time where bringing people together is not happening. It's becoming much more divisive. And moving people forward, right, when we actually stop and think, for many of us, what we recognize is we're taking steps backwards today rather than moving forward. And so it's all of this natural behavior that gets people likes on social media, that get them attention and right. And get them talked about. But it's actually the opposite of leadership, and it's having a negative effect on society.
Yeah. And what I'd add to that, rising above that was that about being a better person. When I was younger.
Pardon me, Mike, you're coming through kind of jumbled there. I don't know.
You mind if I switch over?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, these used to be trouble.
Yeah, I'll edit it out. No worries.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep, definitely.
Much better.
Yep.
All right. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So what I would add to what Joe said is that the process of rising above the natural is the process of becoming a better person, and a better person, a more ethical, moral person. A person who's trying to do the right thing is a better leader. You know, when I was young, I used to think of leadership as a dark art. You know, my early experiences were in the 80s when there was a lot of, you know, mischief going on, and from a certain point of view. And it always seemed to me that in my young, cynical, idealistic mind, that the art of leadership was the art of manipulating people into working harder and lying to them and squeezing productivity out of people. But I never really believed that in my heart. And now, it's become clear since I met Joe that, in fact, organizations, societies, cultures work better when leaders, people who decide to take authority or take responsibility for something, or people who have a formal responsibility, behave better. There are multiple dimensions to this. I mean, one of them is this: if you have someone who's moral, who's ethical, you're more likely to tell them the truth about what's going on because you're not afraid of getting, some horrible disciplinary process happening to you that would be unfair. The truth is valued. I mean, I think you can be better. You can certainly function in healthcare better if you pay attention to the truth and not nonsense. And you're not dissembling, and you devalue illusion and look at reality. I mean, you get better diagnoses that way. A hospital will run better. People get better medical care. And I think that's true in a lot of situations. How do you develop a product that's going to interface with the market in the best way if your whole culture is based on illusion and BSing? How do you figure out what the market's really saying if you're not focused on the truth and reality? And leading the people around you to bring intelligence to you so that you can craft your product, for example. One small example.
Yeah, it reminds me, I was a healthcare executive in primary care clinics for several years, and I took over a clinic that was about 3 years old, and they were averaging around 86% turnover every year. So it was like just a really toxic cesspool of an organization. And I said, yeah, that sounds like a good company to lead. Let's go. And, it didn't say I was smart, but you know what? After the first year, I reduced the turnover to 6%. And I only let go a couple people, and just because they weren't the right fit for that organization. Gave them great references. They went on to do bigger and better things, and everything was great, but they just weren't the right fit there. But how I did it was just, in changing the culture, is going, okay, we're going to talk about the difficult conversations. We're going to have the conversations, publicly and privately, not to embarrass anybody, but to encourage people to be open and share, what their experiences, what they see from their vantage point. What would they do if they were in my seat? And, I looked for low-lying fruit and fixed the things that I could fix right away. And over time, corrected some things in there. And it got to the point where we could grow our clinic, expand our clinic, and it was an underserved area. So that was really instrumental in improving the healthcare of that community. But long story short was just, be real, have real conversations, encourage people to speak up and have them dream and say, it'd be nice if I could do this. It'd be nice if we launched this program. It'd be nice if we could have this type of individual in our clinic that could offer these types of services. So if we could, we did. If not, we partnered with organizations that did have that. And what it did was it encouraged people to think and to be creative. And when they were doing that, all of a sudden their performance just increased. And, the board would say, what did you do to get so much output out of these people? It's like, well, I could say a whip and yelling at people, but that's not it. It was, I created an environment where they could thrive, and I let them, and I got out of their way.
There's two things, Michael, that you learned doing that. I'm sure that, they've proven to say, for people to follow us as leaders, two things have to be present. One is they have to know that we're competent. And competent doesn't mean I have the answer. It means I'm aware that I don't have the answer. And competence doesn't sound like, well, this is how you do A, B, and C. Competence today sounds like, I don't know, let's sit down and figure it out together, right? And people are looking for that because they want to have a voice in it. But the other thing is they have to know we care about them. And in the past, too many people have just cared about their own success, and they lose the group, right? And that's where you get the 86% turnover and all those other factors come in. But it's, again, that's not a natural, right, thing for people to embrace. They come in and they just focus on getting the job done, however they can get the job done, instead of stepping back and saying, wait a minute, it's not working. Why not? Right? It shouldn't be this hard. Okay. Am I involving them and in a way that lets them know I don't know all the answers and I need their help and let's figure it out because we've never been here before, right? It's a different age. And do they truly know that I care about them because I know who they are and I know what they want and I know why they're working, right? And can I draw those connections for them in a way that becomes meaningful? And, we just see a lack of that in too many situations today.
Yeah, it's very natural to, if you're in a stressful job environment, to want to micromanage, to want to tell people what to do exactly, to be afraid of other people outshining you. And so not to give them the opportunity to thrive. But those are not the ways to make an organization or a group function in the highest way.
Yeah, and it was a fun place to work. After I did all of that, when I first got in there, not so much, but it was like, okay, let's work together and figure this out and make this better for all of us. And we did. And it's, I'm very thankful for, all the experiences that I've had in my career, but that particular one stands out from time to time. So not too long ago, the both of you published a book, and it's just, basically, a leadership book. So why don't you share a little bit about that? And as I said in the pre-show, and I know it in the title, it has 52 maxims. I don't think we'll have time to go through all of them, but I'd love to hear, some of those things that you think is applicable. I'm sure it's applicable and it's timeless, but especially what's going on right now in the world where we've got this dynamic of obviously cost and people going back to work or working remotely, or, the argument back and forth on that, and organizations still trying to figure all of that out. I'd love to hear, your thoughts about the book and some things that, people could run with today to help, make their organizations and themselves as leaders a little bit better.
Yeah. Mike?
Well, it all came about because I heard Joe speaking about leadership, and I found myself writing down something he said every 5 minutes as he was speaking to a group of healthcare executives. And I said, well, where's his book? So I went up and I looked on Amazon and there's no book. So I said, Joe, where's your book? And he said, I can't write a book. And I said, yes, you can. And ultimately I talked him into it. And so we worked on it for several years. I don't know. I think that to me, the whole idea that a better person is a better leader was very liberating to me, because it sort of creates a new dimension of leadership from the way I was brought up, and brings a lot more light and hope into the process, because you don't have to play dirty games when you're a leader. You don't have to manipulate. You really, I think, you don't have to lie. There's certain things you can't talk about because, the soul of business is secrecy in a way, but it was just liberating for me to be going through all these things. And ultimately the format of the book came out in maxims and discussions because they're all crystallizable into single sentences. And that's what we have here.
Yeah. And I think what the goal of the book was, Michael, was you can't write a how-to book on leadership because there's not a how-to book on leadership. There's not a how-to book on parenting. And, there's ideas and there's thoughts. And so what we did was, we came up with 52 things we think are important for leaders to think. And so the question that you were asking, I think one of the maxims dealing with, don't let your mental models limit you, right? We are seeing that right now being exposed and explored in ways that was not relevant in the past. The pandemic shut down the workplace, right? And people worked remotely. And CEOs did not like the idea of remote work. They didn't know what to do with it because that didn't fit their own leadership style of managing people. And yet it was forced. And so people, went home, and all of a sudden people got comfortable at home, right? And what we learned was in many, many cases, people worked really well at home. And now that the pandemic is, right, we're out of the crises and we're at a different time, right? There's been a whole lot of discussion and angst around how do we get people back to the office? How do we get people back to work? What I've been sharing with CEOs is it's not about getting them back to work. It's about helping them understand the value of coming back so that they feel like they miss out if they don't come back on occasion, right? It's not about control and mandates. And that's the old mental model. Well, we're going to tell them to come on back. We've got to be here 3 days a week. And it has to be, what's the value for somebody to come back, and what's being missed by not coming back. And I think, for leaders, the biggest thing that I've challenged leaders over the past and currently is, how much time are you putting into your day to think? And it's shocking how few minutes a day a leader will actually find quiet time to think. And that means they're in a reactive mode all the time, right? They're constantly in this reactive mode. But if you sit down and think about it, and you think about your own fears and your own insecurities as a leader, and you get those out of the way, right? And then you look at your anxiety because you've got a board that you're answering to, whatever that is, that you've got to hit certain numbers, and you realize how they drive your decision making, but you get them out of the way. And then you look at the reality of the situation and you ask yourself, if I wasn't afraid, what would the answer be? Right? And all of a sudden you start to realize that the right people, right, will figure out how to do the right work in the right time frame, and you can make it work. And we're seeing lots of companies that are working on what everybody's now calling the hybrid model, right? A couple of days in the office, a couple of days at home, right? And we're seeing some companies that have gone totally remote, right? But to do that, they had to get past their mental models. They had to get past their own insecurities. They had to get past their own fear, if that makes sense. And so the mental model maxim we have is really about, why do you think the things that you think? And what if you thought differently? And what if you allowed your model to bend and change? Like happened for you?
For those of us that had kids that grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s, they probably remember the show Blue's Clues, where Steve had a thinking chair. And I think every executive needs one. I remember the last office that I worked out of before, going full into my organization. And I have a thinking chair here too. But there was an office, had the desk and all that stuff, but there was, also guest chairs in the room. And from time to time, I'd get up from my desk and I'd go sit in one of those chairs. No phone, maybe a notepad nearby. I would just sit there and reflect and think about some things and ask questions. Okay, what am I missing in this? Okay, where are my biases in these decisions? What am I missing here? And then, I talk with, trusted advisors as well. So, okay, what am I missing here? Am I bringing something to this that is holding this back? If I step away from this situation, would it turn out differently? Would it be better, whatever better means? Would it be worse? Approach it and look at it from different lenses. And it made things, especially things we needed to implement, a little bit easier because, we had looked at a lot of things. There's always going to be things you're going to miss, but, those this is how it's always been done mentality, got a lot of executives in trouble during the pandemic and even now as they're saying, oh, everybody comes back, and all of a sudden you start losing some key people. Then you're scrambling and your board is going, okay, what's going on? How come quality control is having issues? Why is our productivity down so much? And, they're looking at the executive. It's their responsibility. And if they're not on top of it, they may be hired, using an old Jack Welch term, and, have to, pick up and go somewhere else. And a lot of those things could be avoided just by thinking. And, it's one of the things I talk about too with people, and when they burn out and stress and all of that, is so many of us have forgotten how to be bored. We're just going, constantly connected to our eye binkies, and we're just, we don't just be. And the more that we do that, the more clarity you'll have, and decisions will come up, and you'll go, wait a minute, maybe if we approach it this way. Well, if you're not relaxed, that's not going to fall in your lap typically. So it's spot on where you're right on. We're just always in this automatic, always on mode and reactive. Yeah. And that's problematic.
Yeah. You said something really key though, too, that goes with thinking, because you talked about advisors, and one of our maxims is about having a cabinet, right? Which is not a natural thing for people to do. And it's about, who is it that you look to help you in your thought process, to hold you accountable, to challenge you, right? And the natural thing is to find people who agree with you, right? they just don't add any value to your life, right? As far as agree with you, right? And when I was young, I loved when people agreed with me because it made it easy until I learned that, the people who disagreed with me usually saw something I was missing, right? And, you break your ankle enough stepping in those potholes and you finally go, okay, what's happening? Right. But again, I find so many people who, even when they take the time to think, they think in a vacuum, right? And it's important to think, but it's important to make sure we have some other voices that are giving us different information so that we can truly expand, our thought process in a way that is beneficial. And it's kind of like the blind spots, right? We have a maximum blind spots, and blind spots are real for every one of us. There's certain things we don't see, but when we have a cabinet and they point them out, if the blind spots remain, they're no longer blind spots. They're just arrogance, right? And then we've got to deal with that. So I think your comment about having advisors is something that is really key for people to really examine and ask themselves, who do they let into their circle that they trust? And what is the process for making sure they're seeing people?
Well, I think it's very natural to, when you're promoted in a position of authority, it's very natural to think that, okay, I have a lot of wisdom, otherwise I wouldn't be here. And then in your mind, automatically you say, I don't really need to think that much. I just need to execute. And you might think to yourself, gee, I'm the wisest person in the room. After all, I'm the boss. Let's just do what I think. But it's a very natural process. The higher up, the more power you get, the less you reflect. So you have to artificially bring reflection into your workday, into your patterns of life so that you can be better.
And when you're in a leadership position, it's so important to have a cabinet because your employees typically are not telling you the whole truth, right? Because, the thing that I constantly remind CEOs is they have a voice that they feel is very comfortable, but people don't hear their voice. They hear their title when they speak. And that can get in the way because people need a job. They need job security. They need a paycheck, right? That's just a reality. And it's not a negative on the culture. It's not a negative on the environment. It's just part of human nature. And so if you're just listening to your people at work and they're telling you partial truth, right? No malice in that, right? It's just reality. You need to make sure you have some outside voices that are hung up on your title so that you can just have that free dialogue.
And I think in addition, you need to be ready to speak the truth to people that you report to, that you're accountable to, even when they're very uncomfortable truths. I mean, there's a natural desire to carefully manage the understanding of your board of directors so that they get a rosier picture than perhaps is accurate, And those are the challenges. I mean, as a boss, your challenge is to make an environment where people can feel like they can speak the truth to you. And as someone who has a boss, your job is to break through the discomfort that is associated with telling the truth. You got to say it in a nice way. You can't be mean, but it's really your ethical obligation to say what you really think. And I tell this to my boss all the time. I preface what I say. You pay me to tell you what I think. And this is what I think. I know this is a little uncomfortable, but I got to tell you, and I try to smile, but I just tell them, I give people feedback, and I learned this from Joe. I give people feedback that's unpleasant by saying, listen, I want you to succeed. That's why I'm telling you this. I love to see people succeed. You got to be careful about this. That's my suggestion. Take it or leave it. I want to see you do well. And that takes the sting out of it a lot.
No, it does. Yeah. Especially when that's the framework that you want the best for your boss, your organization, your client, your friend, your colleague, whomever. When you frame it that way, it's like, look, we're going to have a difficult conversation, but we're doing this because I care about you. I want you to be successful. I want you to thrive, not just survive, just thrive at this. And these are some mistakes that I'm seeing from my viewpoint that you're making that might be holding you back. And you approach it that way, like I said, it does sting, but it's a lot, less stinging than what the blank are you doing, that gets them all defensive. The amygdala starts going whoop, 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 whoop. Right. So it makes it a lot easier to, soft landing kind of thing. And they'll take on it. It'll sting a bit, but then if they're good and they reflect on things, they'll take what you said and go, wow, there was so much gold in that, and I can do this and this. And often, and you know this, a couple tweaks here and there really changes the direction of companies for the better. So it's important that you have those conversations.
It really is. And, I think, the other part of that is, the biggest thing for me is understanding that I don't own the truth. I have a slice of my truth. And when I have a conversation with somebody, I'm sharing my truth with them. I'm not sharing the truth. Right. And there's a big difference between that, because what that does is allow me to stay curious to what I'm missing. And, when we become judgmental about somebody, which is so easy in the workplace to do, right, we just immediately break that relationship, because judgment, right, this separates people and curiosity keeps them together. And I think it's just, that was for us the reason to put the book together, and just think about these things. We can't tell you how to do them. We can't tell you when to do them. Can't tell you the right way to do them. But if you think about these things and you stop and you pause, it might make you just a little bit better.
That's a great tool bag to have, and because you will use them from time to time. And if you're aware of them, then when those opportunities come up to use them, then they're there and you can jump right in. So, Mike and Joe, I've loved this conversation. Where can people find out more about the two of you and this awesome work you're doing?
Well, we're both on LinkedIn. There's a website, overcomingthenatural.com. The book's on Amazon. Certainly you can reach out to either of us through social media, and we'd love to talk to you. We like conversations and hope to hear from somebody.
It'll be great. And I'll definitely have that information in the show notes. Joe, go ahead. You were going to say something?
No, I just think, we're both we love having conversations with people, right? And because we both, Mike is one of these people that if you look at his bio, he's got, I think, 29 different postgraduate degrees. Might be a slight exaggeration there, but it's not much. And, he loves to learn. And, I love to learn and having conversations around this topic. And we just really, I think our goal is we'd love the country just to start thinking about leadership, because we don't see it anymore like we used to. And, and it's not helping. And, even if we just look at it from a political perspective, if both parties would just say, what if we stopped the natural and got into the unnatural, which is, how do we work together and make it better for everybody? Right. And I think the whole country would just calm down a little bit. We'd solve problems.
Yeah. Instead of this sensational, is it, the news, or is it TMZ that I'm watching? And it just seems like, and it doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on. It's unfortunate. And yeah, we're starving for leaders. And it's just like, let's sit down. And I tell this to people all the time on both sides of the fence. It's like, we have a lot more in common than we have different. Let's focus on the commonalities. We can debate and discuss the differences, come to a common ground on those things. There may not be common ground on certain items that tend to be very polarizing in nature. It's like, well, we're just going to park those over there and let's focus on the things that collectively we can make better. And when we do that, we make things better. And then we can go back to those other items. And again, we may never come to agreement on some of those things, and that's okay. As long as the needs of everybody are met, that's all that matters. So I'll definitely all that information in the show notes. So thank you both again for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Breakfast Leadership Show, part of the Breakfast Leadership Network. Visit breakfastleadership.com for tips on empowering your business and your life.